Welcome to the shop. Today we're doing a transmission flush on this L400, but we're going to be doing a full flush, not just a drain and fill. The procedure we're doing today is a transmission service. Now there's two different types of transmission services that you can do. There's a drain and fill, or there's a full transmission flush. Now the drain and fill is what you would normally do at home, and that's just pulling the drain plug out of the transmission pan, draining what's in the pan, and then refilling the transmission again. And there's really nothing wrong with doing it that way, except that it only changes a small portion of the fluid that's in your transmission. The majority of the fluid is still sitting there inside your torque converter and inside the pump itself. And in order to change that out, we need to do a full flush. Now if you took this into a shop to get this done, they would hook it up to a machine which would pump the fluid through the transmission and push new fluid in, push the old fluid out. Obviously, you're not going to have that at home, or at least most of you aren't going to have that at home, and if you do, you're probably not watching this video anyways. So we need to find a way to do it without the machine, and it is completely doable. Keep in mind that doing a transmission service is a little bit of a controversial procedure. There's going to be a lot of people out there saying you should never do this, it'll blow up your transmission. But then there's going to be the equal amount of people that say make sure you flush your transmission or your transmission is going to blow up. So you can decide which side of the fence you want to be on, the don't service it because it will blow up side, or the service it because it will blow up side, and then you can decide whether you want to continue watching this video or not. I service my transmissions. I haven't had one blow up, so I'm going to keep on servicing my transmissions. Anyways, that's enough chit chat. Let's get to this. Now, before we go any further, first thing we want to do is actually check the condition of the fluid that's in the transmission now. So pull your transmission dipstick and white paper towel or piece of paper. Just wipe some of the fluid onto it off of your dipstick. So there you can see the color difference between the new fluid and the old fluid. So this brown discoloration indicates that this fluid is beginning to get fairly worn. It's actually getting pretty bad. The nice pink color on here, that's what you want. So we're gonna flush this out. As we've already confirmed the transmission fluid is bad, we don't want to mix new fluid and old fluid more than we have to. So we're going to start by draining out the transmission pan itself. And that involves simply pulling this plug here, draining it out, and then refilling. So we're basically starting with a basic drain and fill. You can see the fluid coming out of this is very discolored and not really even translucent anymore. I've taken the old fluid and poured it into a container that has measurements on it. It's just an old oil container, and we can see that there's about 5 liters of fluid which we've drained out of this transmission. So I'm going to add 5 liters plus a little bit more back into it at this point. To refill the transmission, you're going to need a couple things. First off, a transmission funnel. If you try to use a regular funnel in here, you're just going to spill it all over the top of your engine, make a huge mess, and get nothing in the transmission. So make sure you get a proper transmission funnel, either the metal one, which I prefer, or you can get one of the plastic ones. Still a little bit awkward here, but it will work. And then of course, you'll need transmission fluid. The ATF, make sure it's Dextron 3. Dex 6 is kind of the common one on the market now, but Dex 3 is what these transmissions use, the older ones, and you'll find that it shifts a lot better if you put in the proper transmission fluid. Even though the Dex 6 is supposed to be compatible with it, it will start shifting hard. Or if you're short like I am and can't actually see in the funnel, you'll still spill it all over the top of the engine. I have a bit of cleanup to do. We've got the van back up in the air, dipstick is in, and I actually added more fluid than we took out. We took out 5 liters and I've added 8.5 back in. You might be wondering why. It's probably bad to add too much fluid to a transmission, right? Well, yeah, you don't want to drive around like that, but for the sake of doing this flush, we need extra fluid in the transmission because as we start to drain it out, we don't want to run the transmission dry. You're guaranteed to do damage if you run it dry, so by adding a little bit of extra, we have a nice safe buffer. Next thing we need to do is access the transmission cooler lines at the radiator, and to do that, we need to get the skid pans out of the way. Your van might be a little bit different because this one has an aftermarket skid plate and bull bar on it, but whatever you have up front here, get it out of the way so you can access the lines above. Now, you can access it without removing the inner skid pan, but it just makes it a little bit easier to access and better visibility. With the skid plates removed, this is what you should be looking at. Your transmission cooler is internal in the radiator. You have one line coming from the transmission on this side, going through the cooler, and then exiting the cooler back to the transmission on this side. This is the line that we're going to be pulling. Now ideally, if you have a second person, you can pull the line up here, while one person holds this line into a bucket, and the second person controls the engine being on and or off. But because I have to do this solo, I will be pulling it from this side. Now the reason it's a little bit more difficult to pull it from this side is, well, first off, getting in here is a little harder, and secondly, these can be a little bit brittle. So if you're too aggressive, you can actually rip this fitting right out of the bottom of the radiator. So be careful if you're removing it from this side. You are going to lose a little bit of fluid when you take this line off, so make sure you have a bucket or something underneath to catch it. Now that we have the transmission line removed, we're going to attach a length of hose onto the barb coming out of the radiator. Ideally, you would use a piece of clear tubing here, and that way you could see when the old fluid has been pushed out and the new fluid is starting to come through. Unfortunately, all I have is a piece of 3/8 fuel line, so we're going to have to make do with that today. So we have our hose connected now, and I have it coming down and just clamped onto my hoist. This is where a second pair of hands comes in handy because somebody can hold the hose and watch the fluid coming out, and another person can control the ignition. Being solo, I've had to find a way to kind of improvise here. So we've got the line clamped onto the lift, and underneath it we have our old oil jug with the measurements on it and a funnel. So we're going to remove 5 liters of fluid, and hopefully in that time the fluid coming out of this line will have changed to a clear pink. If it hasn't, we'll have to add a little bit more fluid to the transmission and do the process over again. Now that we have all the lines hooked back up, we can go ahead and put our skid plates back in place. We removed about 5.5 liters during our flush procedure, so that means that we need to put about 2 liters in again to get it back up to where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to add 2 liters into it here, and then we'll start the vehicle up, get the transmission up to temperature, and check our levels. We don't want it to be too high or too low. If it's too low, we'll add a little bit. If it's too high, well, we'll have to raise it back up and drain a little bit out of the pan. All that's left now is to bring the transmission up to temp and recheck the fluid level. Remember, when you're checking the fluid level on an automatic transmission, the vehicle should be running while you're checking it. We brought the transmission up to temp by putting it in gear, and then with the foot on the brake, bringing the revs up to about 11 or 1200 RPM and cycling it through the gears. It'd be better to take it out for a drive to do it, but there's too many things blocking this vehicle in the garage at the moment, so I can't get it out. So that's just another method of getting it up to temperature quickly. So it looks like we're actually just a little bit high, unfortunately. So that means we're gonna have to lift it up in the air and drain a wee bit of the fluid out. So we were about half a liter or so over full. I just drained that out of the pan and rechecked it while the vehicle was running, and everything is looking good now. So all that's left is to clean up a little bit of the oil that's been spilt. Otherwise, this job's finished. So again, this is something that you can do at home. It's a little bit messy, but it's not a difficult job. Anyways, if you enjoyed this, by all means, please like and subscribe. It gives me the motivation to keep on going. And we'll see you next time. Have a good one.